Senator Shimmick, you are recognized to open on your motion to return LB 296E to select file.
We're not all familiar with what this motion does. It essentially rejects the bill, and that's not my purpose this morning. And I will plan to withdraw this motion after there has been an adequate time for any of my colleagues who wish to address the issue to speak. But if you recall, or some of you may not recall because you weren't here, the last time this bill was before us, it was on select file, and it was a snow day, very definitely, and many of our colleagues weren't on the floor, and there wasn't much debate on the bill, even though I think, as I've been listening to some of you, I think there's a fair amount of concern about some of the issues that the Department of Health and Human Services has to address.
We have a responsibility as a body. We have a responsibility as a body to this agency, Health and Human Services. It is a billion-dollar-plus agency, and it's not enough for us to okay the appropriations and say it is the governor's job to run Health and Human Services. In the checks and balances, we have a responsibility to that agency and to the people who rely on that agency and to the people of the state of Nebraska. It is this body needs to make sure that we're not engaged in a Chinese fire drill. A Chinese fire drill is where teenagers pull up to a red light, somebody screams Chinese fire drill, everybody gets out of the car, and they run around the car for a couple of minutes, and then they all jump back in a door, and the car drives off. If we are going to reorganize Health and Human Services, we cannot have it be a Chinese fire drill where everybody gets back in the car. They may get in different seats, and we may have somebody different driving the car, but ultimately the car's going back and returning to the journey and going to the same place it was intending to go in the first place. We are reorganizing the people, we are reorganizing the titles, but are we changing anything?
I've, as you know, long had concerns regarding service delivery with Health and Human Services, starting with the contracting out of services. I think many of you read in the paper the incident where the 3-year-old was kidnapped by the biological parent that she was visiting. This was a parent she was removed from due to safety concerns. This visit was supervised by a contract agency, and the individual that was supposed to be supervising the visit had left the parent and the child unattended while they went to a fast food restaurant, and then they told a story with discrepancies in it, shall we say, to the police, and then charges were filed on that individual. But the point being that the agency will contract out these services for these children to be handled by individuals they're not familiar with. There's no consistency in service delivery of visitation. More strangers come into the child's life, and people that clearly do not understand the mission of the department in regard to the safety of the child and the issues involved. That's a big concern. There's a lot of money put into that, and there's very little oversight. Second concern I'm going to present to you again, and I'm very repetitive of this, is caseload size. I ask each of you, where would you begin? Of course, you go out and deal with the crisis situation, but at the same time, you've got to be in juvenile court the next morning with a comprehensive report on the well-being of another child. A third concern I'm going to present to you is the training issue. $11,000 is spent for the training of each new child protective service worker. Federal dollars. So what do we care? It's not state money, right? This is like monopoly money. We just request it and it comes in. No, we pay for this. We pay for this. This money is for each new child protection service worker. In meeting with the workers, they're saying to me, these workers are being let go before they're off probation. So it's a constant revolving door of training. Where does this break down?
You cannot just shift the structure around and change the titles of people. It will not be successful, and in the future, we're going to continue to have the problems that we have today. Without us coming forward and looking at that reorganizational structure and requiring goals, requiring benchmarks, and requiring efficiencies to address this issue, folks, it is over $1 billion plus program. And unless we try to put our arms around this in the right way, we are going to fail as a body. And I think we're on the road to failure. And what has to be done here to straighten this up is that we need to bring experts in from outside of the state of Nebraska to begin to address the issue, because you will not get this done in the culture that we have within the Health and Human Services. And let's just face the fact that we're on the course to fail.
Because we're really talking about the blocking and tackling of poverty here. Must be managed better. And I'm hopeful that this bill, this change in organizational structure, is the first step. But as has been suggested here today,
during the reorganization, we were a little bit astounded by Director Peterson. I asked her directly if they had any cost savings involved in this reorganization. She said no, not at this time. Well, if we can't get the cost savings now, I'm not sure when we are going to get the cost savings. But we went through the leadership flow chart. We don't know if that's going to work, especially the three freshmen. I guess we don't know if that's going to work because we weren't around when it was reorganized in 1997.
As a member of the legislature, and when I was out campaigning, I talked a lot about accountability and what's my responsibility as a state senator. My responsibility as a state senator is to make sure that the taxpayers' dollars are being spent in an efficient and effective manner. And right now I can't necessarily say that that's happening with HHS. I can remember reading to my children a story about an emperor and the clothes that he wore. And towards the end of the story, there was one person who had the audacity or who had the courage to say, the emperor has no clothes. And I think that's our responsibility today, to say to this agency, you have no clothes.
Senator White asked Chris if she felt that this department had been a good steward of the public's money. Her answer was no. My concern with anything we do with Health and Human Services at this point is, are the controls in place that this type of negligence will not occur in the future? We've heard in this legislature that they do not have money to hire more caseworkers to protect our children, but they can lose over $1.5 million and not be able to be accountable as to where that money went or why that money was not attempted to be recovered. We need to seriously stop and look at this bill that is going through and make sure that we are holding Health and Human Services accountable, that they are going to have reasonable accounting practices. I've seen since I've come to Lincoln, we may as well piled $1 million into a big bonfire and lit it up as the lack of care that was exhibited. That's money. Tonight, children in Nebraska will go to bed hungry because Health and Human Services said they didn't think it was economically feasible to finance Senator Copeland's bill that would take federal money to feed our children. This in one of the greatest breadbaskets in the world.
But let's do what we need to do to move up from 43rd in the country when it comes to taking care of our children to first. Thank you.
Clearly, something must be done about HHS. I'm not going to vote for this bill, but I'm not going to offer amendments or anything to try to kill it. The votes probably are here to send it on. I haven't read the whole bill, but I venture to say I've read more of it than most on this floor. That bill is several inches thick. Not every change is of consequence. When you have a bill like that, sometimes you have to change a few words, but you have to change them every place they appear in the statute, so that adds to the number of pages. Some people will look at the thickness of the bill, and the mere thickness of it will deter them from reading or putting forth an effort to read it. The kind of discussion going on now is the kind that should have attended the movement of this bill across the floor of the legislature. But that water has been spilled.
1 minute.
The genie is out of the bottle. The genie is not going to be returned to the bottle. In years to come, dissatisfaction will be expressed with not only the way HHS is not doing its job, but with the organizational structure. There was a lot of thought put into this bill by those who crafted it, but not much thought put into it by those of us on the floor of the legislature. The final straining or review of the bill is to be done by us, and the ball has been dropped. But a deal is a deal with me. I made my deal with the devil, or they made their deal with this devil, and the devil, even in literature, has always kept his word, even when others violated theirs. Thank you, Mr. President.
It is the responsibility of the committee that Senator Pankin and Senator Hansen have talked about this morning to make sure that we are holding them accountable. And it's going to take an effort, and it's not going to happen overnight, but it is going to happen with constant watch. And whether you want to call it benchmarks or whether you want to call it legislative oversight, whatever you want to call it, we have that responsibility, and I'm hopeful that with this new group and continuing with what we've begun in the past, that we'll be able to see additional improvements in the agency.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the body. Yesterday, too, I was kind of sad after the committee meeting, and I'm proud to be a native Nebraskan and running for office. My opponents called us the welfare capital of the Midwest. I don't exactly agree with that statement, but before we fix things, let's make sure where the problems are. Sometimes we're in the forest, we wander around there, you know, and we can't see the problem for the trees. Accountability is almost non-existent. I am proud to be a Nebraskan, and they do lots of good things. HHS, let's not condemn them right across the board. They do some good things. But our number one mission on this earth, according to the Bible, is love your children. And that's our number one mission. Take care of the children. And if we don't take care of our children, where's our society going?
Government does two things really well. Government does two things halfway decent, I should say. It organizes and it funds. It finances. Implementation is a totally different subject. I'm a married man, and I have had, particularly probably since, this is a stressful job. We all know that. And my wife and I are both passionate people, and we fought in front of our children. And one day, I brought all the kids down and sat them down on the couch, tears in their eyes, and I said, I love your mother, and she loves me. That's all you have to know. Dismissed. And everything was fine.
Time.
I need more.
I do believe we can make changes, but it's going to take a commitment from everyone in this body. I certainly can't do it alone. And I ask you to support me on this and to support these children that, through no fault of their own, have come into foster care.
I think it's important that that when we reorganize Health and Human Services and we put a CEO in charge of that organization and we say you will be accountable for the functioning of that agency, that when you are talking about $1 billion budget, when you are talking about 6,000 employees plus, when you are talking about what's at stake, that we should have a search for a CEO that goes across the country.
Senator Harms and Senator Lathrop have basically hit the nail right on the head, and I think I'd like to commend Chris Peterson for everything she has done. She served in the legislature here a few years ago and then went on over to Health and Human Services and become part of that organization, and she's done a fine job. And then I'd like to commend anybody that's read the entire bill. I'd like to ask what's like on page 662, paragraph 3, what that means, you know. And I don't think any of us, well, perhaps someone could here. If Chris Beitler was still in the legislature, we could ask him, and he said, yes, I have read it, because he spends his nights reading bills. I think it's faith. What we're doing when we're passing a bill this large, we're passing it on faith.
Senator Fisher reminds me, it's funny, I was trying to say, look, I'm trying to make a point here, and she goes, you never have a point. Well, maybe she's right, but I think I have one here. That this bill's eye candy. I've read it. I know what it does. What we're doing is spending a lot of time, and I'm part of the mix, obviously, spending a lot of time talking about reform and doing things that's going to change this system. Two things. One, we can't. Nationwide, they're having problems with government agencies trying to fulfill the needs of people and the social ills that plague us. None of them are successful. Measure the success rates. Measure it against places like Boys Town, Girls in Boys Town. Measure it against private institutions that do this work. Measure those health and human services organizations against those benchmarks. It never adds up. So this is eye candy. And we're talking about how bad health and human services. Of course, it's a government agency, and it's a big one. Before, I made the comments that, you know, about how I dismissed my kids and moved them on to the rest of their evening or day. It's happened before. It'll happen again. My kids are fortunate enough to have it at home. Some aren't. Where are they going to go to Health and Human Services to get it? I beg to differ.